Let's talk today about the absolutely insane way ISO makes money. First of all, is ISO actually a standards developer? Because ISO claims that it develops standards. In multiple documents on its website, it says it is an ISO standards developer. But let's test that. So let's look at Game of Thrones first of all. It's a fact that Game of Thrones is a book that's written by George R.R. Martin. That book is then published by Bantam Books. Another set of facts is that Game of Thrones is not written by men fighting undead dragons because they don't exist. Another fact, Harry Potter was written by J.K. Rowling and is published by Bloomsbury Publishing out of the UK. Another fact, Harry Potter is not written by witches. So here is the publishing reality in all cases. Publishers don't write books. Writers write books. Publishers publish books. That's why they're called publishers. So now, prepare your mind because it's about to get blown. ISO 9000 is a book. They happen to call it a standard, but it's literally a book. It is a book that is published by the International Organization for Standardization, or ISO. But it's written by individual people who are members of something called the ISO Technical Committee 176, or TC 176. That's who writes it. Wait for it. Some facts. ISO doesn't write ISO 9001. ISO is not an expert organization in quality management. ISO has, in fact, no experience in quality management systems. It also doesn't ride dragons. So it's untrue to say that ISO is a standards developer. ISO publishes standards that are written by other people. It does not develop standards itself. I will leave you with that to decide whether it's a lie or just an exaggeration of a falsehood. Now let's look, for example, at the traditional publishing model and how publishers make money. Okay, so this plucky couple on the left, they're the writers. They write the book and they send the book to the publisher, who's this guy on the right. The publisher then sells that book to the public. The public sends money to the publisher to buy the book. And in exchange for all this writing, the publisher then gives a percentage of that money back to the writers. And that's how writers get paid. Writers write books in order to make money. And they have to get money and they get paid by the publisher. Now that's the traditional publishing model. Now let's look at the ISO publishing model because it's absolutely nuts. It starts off the same way. The authors of a book write the book and they give it to ISO. ISO then makes that book available for sale. The public buys that book and sends money to ISO. Now, here's where things get different. Normally, a publisher would then send money back to the authors. That's not what happens. ISO sends nothing to the authors, nothing. That means the authors have surrendered their intellectual property and their hard work to ISO without any attempt at getting anything back for that. Now let's say that they decide, well, we need to make a little bit of money. So perhaps the authors or their member nation decide they want to publish a copy of ISO 9000 itself. For example, like in the United States, it's ANSI. ANSI decides it wants to publish its own copy. In order to do that, the authors have to pay money to license that material back from ISO. Now they're licensing the material that they wrote. They're paying money to use the material that they created. Now they may then sell that to the public. And now if the public wants to, let's say, quote the information in that book in an article or a blog post or whatever, they then also have to pay ISO again for the rights to license that information. So you've got all of this money flowing back to ISO, with ISO not giving any of that back to any of the people inside the entire scheme. This is absolutely crazy. And all it results in is that ISO winds up with a ton of money and all the people who did the actual work are left with zero. And in fact, they're left in a red balance because they had to pay for this arrangement. Now I want to tell you about a subset of the publishing industry called the Vanity Press. Vanity Presses are companies that will publish your book even if it sucks. So let's say that you want to write a book on choosing the right hand saws, or a short treatise on hickory handles. Okay, you take this manuscript to publishers and they say, there's no way we're publishing this because we can't sell it. There's no money in this. You get so frustrated that you decide, I'm going to print it myself. And so you pay a printing company, which is called a Vanity Press, and they'll publish your book no matter how terrible it is. And essentially what they're doing is they're printing it, and then they give you cases of books and you go out and sell them. And that's called a vanity press because it appeals to the vanity of authors who are so terrible they can't get their work published anywhere else. So what is a vanity press? Well, Wikipedia says a publishing house which authors pay to have their books published. Publication by a vanity press is typically not seen as conferring the same recognition or prestige as a commercial publication. And this is important. While a commercial publisher's intended market is the general public, a vanity publisher's intended market is the author. The author pays them to publish their book, no matter how good or bad it is. So remember now, TC 176 is comprised of unpaid volunteers. Those volunteers, who by the way claim to be business experts, voluntarily surrender their intellectual property, and they do that to enhance their own personal brand, to promote their consulting companies or their auditing companies or whatever. Then through their member bodies, and sometimes them literally themselves, they actually pay ISO for this arrangement, which is nuts. Now let's look at some ISO revenue data. According to the revenue from 2013, although more recent reports show that these figures are about the same, 54% of ISO's revenue, which was over 23 million in that time, came from membership fees. These are the member bodies paying ISO for the arrangement to allow them to take their intellectual property and publish it and keep all the money themselves. Another 21% was from copyright revenue. And then the sales to the public was only 15%. So the sales of the books comprise only 15% of the revenue. That's not their main source. They're not really interested in publishing books to the public. They're interested in pretending to publish books so that people who want to approach a vanity press and get their book published will pay them for that. So that 54% chunk proves that ISO is a vanity press. And then they've got some other 10% for other sales. For example, ISO once literally wanted money from Oxebridge simply for discussing their standards. They had their lawyers send a cease and desist because we were reporting on a draft standard. They said that discussing their draft standards was confidential, and they wanted us to pay for that privilege. Now, we didn't pay them, and they backed down. Now, how much does ISO actually expend related to standards development activities according to its own tax filings and annual reports? If it says it's a standards developer, okay, how much money does it spend on that every year? The figure is a nice round zero. $0 are spent by ISO on actual standards development. Therefore, we can say it is a fact that ISO is the largest single vanity press on the planet. So why on earth would we trust anyone involved in this scheme? The authors are amateurs who willingly surrender their intellectual property to someone else. Who does that? Next, the national member bodies actually pay for this arrangement, and this involves them handing over national expertise, national technology, intellectual property, things that private companies have acquired over the years, handing that over to an organization that is accountable to no one. And then ISO collects all the revenue from every single person involved in this scheme, from every angle, the authors, the hosts, the readers, the consumers, anyone who even references their standards. None of this is sound business. Ironically, all of this is akin to the mafia tactics that were used in the illegal oil importation industry in the United States in the 1920s. And this, my friends, is the absolutely insane way ISO makes money. Plenty more over at the Oxebridge site. If you have any questions, feel free to write me, but make sure you visit, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll always be kept informed on the latest monkey shines by ISO and the various registrars that are working in the field. Thanks a lot.